Aloha. I'm Representative Cynthia Thielen, and it's my privilege today to be here on Olelo with retired Professor Randall Roth from the William S. Richardson School of Law. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
We are talking about the state's most expensive public works project ever, and what should happen to rail. My opinion, and I'll give it right now, is that at the very least, we need to bring the rail project down to earth at Middle Street and then run the project on the ground, saving our historic Chinatown district, our beautiful downtown area, the Capital District, and keeping that sucker at street level area. But I think, Dr. Roth, you have more things to say, and I would really appreciate hearing from you about them, about the rail project, and what its impact is on all of us on the island of Oahu.
Well, when this was proposed some years ago, Mayor Hanneman initially indicated that the 34-mile route, it's now down to 20 miles, but at that time 34-mile route could be completed for under $3 billion.
And a billion, that's with a B.
That's with a B, and that's a big number. That grew by the time the city entered into a contract with the federal government. That estimate had grown to $5.2 billion, which is still a very big number. Ironically, for another billion or two, they could have run the rail under the surface downtown, so there would have been no disruption of the historic district and the business district and a lot of other areas that are going to be very much affected by elevated rail. At that time, the city said, well, we couldn't possibly afford $7 billion. The money's simply not there, and so they had to do the elevated route, according to what they were saying at that time. Fast forward to today, and the city has acknowledged that including financing costs, which are real costs, it takes the same color of green money to pay them, the city has acknowledged we're looking at about $10 billion.
$10 billion.
$10 billion, which is roughly double the number at the time of the contract with the federal government, triple the number that Mufi Hanneman was talking about just 12 years ago, and it's only for a 20-mile route.
You know what makes me really puzzled about this? How could government leaders not get the cost of the full project before they began it? I mean, any homeowner knows that you don't start a renovation project unless you know what is it going to entail, what is it going to cost, the full project, what will it cost. I don't recall any of those city leaders doing this.
You know, I can't read their minds, but the only explanation that makes any sense to me as to why they rushed into starting rail before they had really any good idea what it was going to cost was that they wanted to get construction past what would be perceived as a point of no return. They wanted to have spent so much money that when the issue as it is today is whether to give the city more money, they wanted to be able to say, look, we've already spent billions, we can't possibly stop now.
But that's such a false approach. I mean, that there's time to cut your losses and to say, we've got to stop and just see if there is a more viable way to do this. How are we hitting all of the, like say a family of four? How are we going to hit them with what rail is going to take out of their budget, out of their livelihood?
What each of us is bearing in terms of the cost of building rail is a little bit difficult to picture, because it's primarily being paid with general excise tax. And general excise tax is literally a business tax. When we go to the cash register and pay 4.71%, we're really reimbursing the business. It is the taxpayer. most of the taxes it pays, it doesn't pass directly to the consumer at the point of sale. When you go through the analysis, what you find is that even taking into account that upwards of 30% is exported to non-residents, tourists, for example, pay it. Even when you take that out, already an average family of 4 on Oahu has paid over $5,000 for the construction of rail. And based on the city's own forecast, if we continue to build, the average family of 4 will incur another $20,000 in addition to the $5,000+ that they've already incurred.
So that's over for every child, every infant, child,
well,
adult?
That's for a family of 4. So the additional amount that hasn't yet been spent but will be spent if this project proceeds is roughly $5,000 per man, woman, and child. For an average family of 4, then, that works out to slightly more than $20,000 of additional amounts. And if you say, well, that's outrageous and it's an average family can't pay that much, most of what they're paying isn't in the form of a general excise tax. Most of it is a higher cost of everything they pay for in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. A significant chunk of our high costs of goods and services is the business.
We're really talking children's education, college education, and the money instead is going to be siphoned out and has been siphoned out of the average family of 4.
When we talk about the price of paradise, the high cost of living here, the city and the state act as though it's not much of a burden for the people of this island to pay for rail with excise taxes, but it'd be a terrible, terrible burden to pay for it property taxes. What's the same dollar amount, and ironically, excise taxes are more regressive than property mm-hmm. taxes. Property taxes are arguably slightly progressive. And the point that makes is that the way we're funding the rail project not only is way more expensive than most people realize, but it's more proportionately burdensome. That is, as a percentage of their income, it's more mm-hmm. burdensome on low and middle income people on this island than it is on high income people. It makes no sense, and yet the city is back here asking for more, another $3 billion.
Well, that's okay, you're bringing up a very important point, because we apparently are going to be having a special session, and the big push is going to be fund the rail. Can you give some good reasons? I know you've brought some handout material. Could you give some good reasons why we should just stop, take a deep breath, and take a look at this in more depth, right, rather than just simply, okay, we'll give the city, Mayor Caldwell, what he wants?
Right. The city doesn't want to take a step back and talk about, well, why are we doing this in the first place, and is this working, and are there alternatives? What the city, through their actions, have said to all of us is, we just have spent too much to stop now, give us more money.
But no one in a family situation, in a household situation, would ever come up with that kind of an argument. We've spent so much, right, so we have to continue spending more? And I mean, this is nuts.
It is nuts, and it was nuts from the beginning, because when you stop and ask yourself, well, why are we doing this anyway? Initially, it was sold as a way to reduce traffic congestion. We have a terrific traffic congestion problem on this island, especially in the corridor that would be affected by rail. But even rail promoters in the environmental impact statement acknowledge that traffic congestion is going to be worse in the future after rail is completed than what it is today.
Randy, I've talked to some of the major proponents at the Capitol, major rail proponents at the Capitol, who happen to live in areas where they could get on rail. My question, are you going to use rail? No, but someone else will. And that's the whole problem, as I see it, that we're going to have many riders that will want to have their car because they have so many other things that they need to do, kids to soccer practice, you name it, all of the different things, and they aren't going to get onto the rail project.
The thing is, estimating what ridership will be on rail is every bit as uncertain and challenging as is estimating what the cost of construction will be. The same expert consultants who assisted the city in coming up with a cost estimate that we now know with hindsight was ridiculously off were the ones that assisted in the determination of who's going to ride rail, what the ridership is going to be. The last heavy rail system that this expert worked on and made projections, what ended up being the actual ridership was roughly 1/4 of what this expert had predicted. I've talked to experts who've said if Honolulu finishes its rail all the way to Ala Moana Center, the ridership is going to be at most 1/3, perhaps as little as 1/4 of what's being projected. So the point is, and you are making it beautifully, there just aren't going to be nearly as many riders as what was forecast when this was being sold. And in the meantime, you say, okay, if in the environmental impact statement they've acknowledged that traffic congestion would be worse in the future with rail than what it is right now, better than what it would be if we did absolutely nothing, but nobody's in favor of doing absolutely nothing. Now that they've acknowledged that it would be worse in the future with rail, if we complete rail, than what it is right now, what's the reason for having rail? Well, they say transit-oriented development, but we now have some hindsight. We can look back and say, how many developers have been fighting each other to get in line?
Explain for the viewers what transit-oriented development is.
The theory with elevated rail is that people aren't going to drive their cars to a rail station. In fact, they're building very, very little parking. So people are going to have to either take a bus to a rail station or they're going to have to walk. And so the idea is we're going to make this rail so nifty that developers are going to want to build a whole lot of housing units right around those stations so that people can walk to the station. And developers are going to build all kinds of places that employ people around those stations so that people can get off the train and walk to work, so that they don't have to take buses to the train stations and buses from the train stations. But there isn't anything in the works that qualifies as transit-oriented development. And in other places where it has happened, it's been because the government has subsidized it. The government has given money to these developers to build things that market conditions wouldn't otherwise have them build. So
that's more of a use of taxpayers' money.
Oh yeah.
So the whole thing is just...
The city has been making noise about, we're going to get the private sector, we're going to get the developers, we're going to get all these people who are going to make money from rail, we're going to get them to help pay for rail. It's the exact opposite. In order to get them to do anything that fits into the transit-oriented development model, the government's going to have to pay them, which comes out of the pockets of taxpayers.
I mean, that's the thing. When the government has to pay it, it means it comes out of all of our Oahu residents'
and even if it's indirectly,
pockets.
even if it's just a tax credit, you know, you don't have to pay property taxes for X years or whatever, well, that's more that has to be paid by everybody else.
We don't have the income to fund the other projects that we need to. This is like a dark hole. I've just recently sent out a legislative report, and the cartoon was done by John Pritchett, and I absolutely adore it. It shows the dark hole. And then with the spaceship going in and saying it's rail costs, Captain Kirk, we're being sucked into the black hole. And there we are.
Pritchett is a genius. He's done so many great cartoons. That's the latest.
And then the other thing within the report was to bring the Honolulu Rail project back to planet Earth. And what concerns me, Randy, is that we are going to have a special session, I believe. I don't want to see us take an action that will give Mayor Caldwell more money for a project that still hasn't been priced in its entirety, meaning that the taxpayers just have to continue to pay and pay and pay. Right. And this is huge, huge amounts of money that are unjustified on our island. We're not like a Los Angeles, where they maybe can look at these kinds of things, but we're a small island where our taxpayers are really being hurt. And when you talk about taking $20,000 out of a family of 4, you're talking of college educations.
Well, and it's even worse because we've only been talking about the costs of construction. If rail were completed, as the city is wanting to do, it would cost more than $100 million each year just to operate rail. That's over and above what the fares would be. Plus, what the Federal Transit Administration is now saying, because of the problems that cities with rail have gotten into in terms of keeping their systems up to date, keeping their systems safe and clean and attractive so that people will ride it, they haven't had the money to do that sort of thing. The renovation costs that generally have to be done every decade or so. And a sinking fund that the city should be contributing to so the money will be there when those needs present themselves is another $100 million per year. So $200 million per year that are going to have to come from someplace in order to maintain a system that is attractive to riders. The city has not even talked about where that would come from.
How can the city go ahead with a project of this magnitude without doing the financial examination and making that public so the public is aware of what it is? I mean, I go back again to homeowners that you're not going to start a project with just a runaway budget and no idea of how it's going to end up. People are they're smarter than that.
You know,
what happened with our city leaders?
It's almost like they've put a gun to the city's head and said, you know, you can't stop this. In other words, if you stop it, you're wasting the billions of dollars that have already been spent. That's why they rushed into this before they knew what it was going to cost, before they knew how to go about doing this. They rushed into it so that they could be able to argue in circumstances like we have right now that it's just too late to stop. And if the legislature gives them any additional amount of money, right now there's enough to get to Middle Street and stop. If the legislature gives them any more money than that, the city's going to be back in a year or two. And in fact, if the legislature gave them another $3 billion, which at a minimum is what it would take to get to Ala Moana Center. Panos Prevederos from the University of Hawaii says more like $6 billion, but at a minimum $3 billion. If the legislature gave them that, they got all the way to Ala Moana Center, ridership is going to be so low, the cost of operating so high, that what they'll do is go right back to the legislature at that time and they'll say, you know what, we've already spent 10 to 13 billion and we don't have enough riders to justify operating costs. We have to extend this to Manoa, we have to extend this to Waikiki, we have to extend it in various directions because we've spent too much money to stop. It'll be basically the same argument they're making right now.
So it's basically the black hole. And the only sense, I think, came from the legislature during this last session, which did not cave to that argument. We just said no. No.
And the legislature needs to say, look, you haven't explained why this estimate has already doubled. Mm-hmm. You haven't explained why the number of jobs produced is a small fraction of what you had promised. You haven't explained, and there's a long list of, quite frankly, it was just deception at the very beginning. At the very beginning, they said this was going to be saving a lot of energy. Well, now we know, based on U.S. Department of Energy figures, if our rail system has average energy use, given the nature of the system, that because it's going to run 20 hours a day and only be busy during rush hour, the average amount of energy used per passenger mile, based on the optimistic ridership projections that the city has offered, the average energy used per passenger mile is going to be more than what it costs right now in energy for one person in one car to go from here to there.
That's disgraceful. That's going backward. And that's not what we wanted to be known for in Hawaii. We wanted to become the renewable energy capital of the United States.
And yet, if you only run the system when you've got a crowd to take care of, then you don't have any of the benefits of a rail system. They've painted the taxpayers into a corner of sorts. And I say the gun to the head, they're saying to the legislature, you simply can't stop giving us money now. You've given us too much. We've spent too much. You have to give us more money. I pray that the legislature says, no.
I know.
Just do what you can with the $7 billion that you've already got at your disposal.
And the $7 billion, they can get to Middle Street and then reassess what they need to do.
And quite frankly, it's not inconceivable that the smartest thing, terribly unattractive, but it's conceivable to me that the least of our many unattractive options is to simply stop right now and to use that guideway for something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's I think just a ridiculous argument to come and say, you've given us too much money, so you have to keep giving us more money. Try that if you're a teenager. Go to the parents and say, well, you gave me so much money for, whatever, fun activities. You've got to keep giving me more. I mean, families are more sensible about their spending.
Right.
And the public officials at the city are just runaway spenders.
And
but they're spending not their own money.
Right.
They're spending the people's money.
And I have to some degree blame the media. In the past, and Civil Beat did a much better poll recently, but in the past, the polls have asked people, would you like rail to go to All-in-One Center? Would you like rail to be complete? That's like asking somebody, would you like a BMW? Would you like a Lexus? Now, if you added, and your car payment every month is going to be $800, or it's going to cost $300 a month just to maintain it, or the insurance is going to be $400, or whatever the numbers are, a household, they can't just say, oh, that's attractive, I want it. They got to say, what's it cost? Where's the money going to come from? And what will I not be able to provide? An education for the kids, or who knows what, if I spend it on that Lexus or that BMW? Well, the city has basically said, boy, look at this shiny rail system. Wouldn't you like to have a rail system? And when the polls ask that, rather than, are you willing to pay in additional taxes? An average family of four, $25,000. They've already paid $5,000. The city wants them to incur another $20,000. If it's put in those terms, are you willing to pay the cost, you get a very different result than what the polls that have been done in the past.
So they did not have the majority of people voting in favor of using their $25,000 for a family of four.
Well, they haven't asked that question. It's been basically, do you want to have a rail system?
Well, the city, of course, is going to do the glossy, this is wonderful for everyone, but is anyone putting out poll questions to get a real answer of what people feel about rail with the amount of money that's coming out of their pockets?
Just a week or so ago, Civil Beat did a poll that compared to previous polls that I'd seen on rail was much better. And it indicated that the vast majority of people are upset. Whether they were pro-rail, anti-rail, they're very upset with the situation as it's developed. And you get a large number that say, just don't give another penny.
Well, that's the message. That's the message we need to get to the legislators, because a special session, if we hold the line and we don't cave to the city and we say, no more money, then that gives people a chance to back up and take a look and look at a better way to do this.
And I've admired you for a long time, Cynthia. There are other people in the House that I think are capable of showing tremendous leadership, and it will take courageous leadership at this point in time because so much has been spent already. I think Scott Psyche, the new Speaker, Sylvia Luke, who is chair of the Money Committee, they happen to be former students of mine, and they were outstanding students. But they are outstanding legislators. I think they've got the ability. They certainly understand the issues, and I hope, I pray that they've got the courage, because it's going to take it right now. But if they hold the line, if they say, no, you're not going to force us by wasting money and getting us to this point in time, you're not going to force us to give you more money, I think the people of this state will very much appreciate that.
Well, I agree with you, and I think we need to back them up, very much so, because the pressure must be just extreme on them. But when you look at this, you look at a project that is a billion-dollar cost runaway, and you look at the choices that a family has of wanting to educate their children in college or siphoning it off to this black hole that's going to just be not only taking all the money now, but then taking it for the operation of it, and all to bring people from that side of the island to a shopping center.
Right.
It's nuts.
And it's tragic that money that needs to be spent on relieving traffic congestion, there are proven traffic congestion relief efforts that can be made.
Well, and the state has done a few of these,
You know,
which is, I appreciate, where they've added a line on certain portions of freeways,
right,
and that's working great.
And a lot of that is because of Panos Prevederos, his recommendations.
Oh, that's good.
He has said if the city and the state would work together on relieving traffic congestion, a few $1 billion, which is not much in the context of rail costing a minimum of $10 billion, it wouldn't take a huge amount of money to seriously reduce traffic congestion.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, we can't do that because we're spending it and way more money that people can't afford over here building something that even the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, acknowledges is not going to result in less traffic in the future than what we have today.
Then the legislature has to stand firm and say, no more money. Stop now. Finish building with what you have, or stop it right now, and let everyone reassess this problem. It's too big to continue it. Too big to continue it. Thank you, Randy.
You said that beautifully.
I really appreciate your being here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Aloha to everyone. Send the message through to the legislature. It's too big to continue it. Stop rail. Aloha.